I walked into court carrying a single leather folder, while my ex-husband arrived with 3 attorneys. The whispers started before I even reached my table. She came alone. She couldn't even hire a lawyer. Ethan leaned back in his chair like he'd already won. At 41, he had perfected that smile, the one that said everyone else in the room existed beneath him. Beside him, his girlfriend gave me a slow, pitying look before murmuring just loud enough for the first row to hear. "That's actually sad." A few people chuckled. My chair scraped softly across the courtroom floor as I sat down without responding. I placed my folder in front of me, folded my hands, and waited. Ethan couldn't resist. "I offered you a fair settlement, Trina," he said with a smug grin. "You should have taken it instead of embarrassing yourself." His attorney smiled confidently. The bailiff called the room to order. Everyone stood as the judge entered. He glanced briefly toward Ethan's expensive legal team before his eyes landed on me. Instead of opening the hearing, he studied my face for several quiet seconds. Then he slowly turned toward Ethan's lead attorney. "Counsel," he asked evenly, "you seriously don't know who she is?" Every whisper in the courtroom died instantly. Ethan's smile disappeared. For the first time that morning, he looked at me instead of through me. No one spoke. Even Ethan's attorney looked confused. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," he asked cautiously. The judge didn't answer immediately. He simply continued looking between the attorney and me, almost as though he expected someone else to explain the situation first. I offered nothing. There was no smile. No correction. No attempt to rescue anyone from the uncomfortable silence. Eventually, the judge nodded once. "Very well," he said. "Let's proceed." The hearing hadn't even begun, yet something in the room had shifted. People who had been staring at me with sympathy were now staring with curiosity. Court staff, who had barely noticed me moments earlier, suddenly paid closer attention. Even Ethan frowned. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something under his breath. The attorney whispered back, though neither seemed particularly concerned. Whatever the judge had meant, Ethan clearly believed it couldn't possibly matter. He had spent months making sure I would walk into this courtroom looking exactly like this. Alone. That had been his favorite word throughout the divorce. "You're alone now, Trina." He repeated it during mediation. He repeated it whenever negotiations stalled. And he repeated it in every conversation where he insisted I accept whatever settlement he offered. According to Ethan, I had no real choice. After all, I had supposedly walked away from my career years ago. Most people believed that story because Ethan had repeated it often enough. Whenever someone mentioned that I had practiced law before our marriage, he would casually laugh. "Oh, that was ages ago." Or, "She used to do that." Eventually, people stopped asking. They stopped introducing me as an attorney. I slowly became known simply as Ethan Bennett's wife. It hadn't happened overnight. It happened through hundreds of tiny conversations where my accomplishments became past tense while his became headlines. When his real estate company expanded into multiple cities, I quietly stepped away from the high-profile appellate cases that had once filled my calendar. The decision wasn't forced with shouting. It came through quieter pressure. "We need one stable schedule. My business is growing. It'll only be for a little while." Those little whiles turned into years. While Ethan's public profile grew larger, mine slowly disappeared from public view. I never resented supporting our family. What I hadn't expected was for Ethan to later use that sacrifice against me. By the time he filed for divorce, he spoke about me as though I'd never built a career of my own. When friends asked how negotiations were going, he'd shrug. "She'll settle eventually." "And why's that?" someone once asked. "Because litigation costs money." He smiled exactly the way he was smiling now. "Eventually, she'll realize she can't afford to keep fighting." He believed pressure solved every problem. especially financial pressure. That belief explained almost everything he'd done during the months leading to today's hearing. The delays, the endless paperwork, the repeated settlement offers that became smaller instead of larger. Each one carried the same unspoken message. You can't keep this up forever. The strange part wasn't that Ethan underestimated me. It was that he never seemed bothered by what I actually asked for. I never argued about emotions, never demanded apologies, never even discussed who deserved what. Every response I sent through the divorce process contained only one request: business records, corporate filings, financial statements, tax documents. Again, and again, and again. Each request irritated him more than the last. Why do you keep asking for paperwork? He'd snapped during one mediation session. If you're planning to settle anyway, what's the point? I looked directly at him. I'd still like the records. Nothing more. Nothing less. He rolled his eyes. You don't even know what you're looking at. Maybe that was what he truly believed. Or maybe he simply wanted everyone else to believe it. Now, sitting across from him in that courtroom, I noticed something small. The confidence he'd worn so comfortably only minutes earlier had developed its first crack. Not fear. Not yet. Just confusion. His eyes moved from me to the judge, and back again. He still thought he'd already won. But for the first time, he wasn't entirely sure why the judge had asked that question. And neither was anyone else. The judge adjusted a document on his bench, giving no indication of what he had meant. "Mr. Collins," he said to Ethan's attorney, "you may proceed." "Thank you, Your Honor." Mr. Collins stood with the confidence of someone who had delivered the same argument dozens of times. "This is a straightforward divorce matter," he began. "My client built a successful real estate business through years of hard work. Mrs. Bennett chose not to maintain her legal career, contributed very little to the growth of those businesses, and is now seeking an unreasonable share of assets she neither created nor managed." Ethan folded his hands and looked toward me with quiet satisfaction. This was exactly the story he'd been telling everyone. Simple, believable, comfortable. The judge's eyes shifted to me briefly. "Mrs. Bennett, you'll have an opportunity to respond." "I understand, Your Honor." My answer was calm enough that several people in the gallery looked surprised. Ethan noticed it too. His expression tightened ever so slightly. He was used to seeing frustration whenever we discussed the divorce. During mediation, he deliberately stretched negotiations for months. "I can keep paying attorneys forever," he'd told me once after another session ended. "Can you?" "I'd still like the financial records," I'd replied. He laughed. "Forget the records." "No. You'll settle before you ever see them." "I'll wait." That answer had irritated him more than any argument could have. Every meeting followed the same pattern. He demanded concessions. I requested documents. He accused me of being unrealistic. I asked for corporate filings. He talked about moving on with his life. I requested accounting statements. Eventually, he slammed a folder shut. "What exactly do you think you're going to find?" I simply looked at him. The truth usually leaves paperwork. Back in the courtroom, Ethan shifted in his chair as though that old conversation had suddenly resurfaced in his mind. He leaned toward Mr. Collins and whispered something. The attorney nodded, but kept speaking. Still, I noticed him glance at me for the first time, not dismissively, but curiously. Why had I spent months asking for records instead of money? Why had I never once argued emotionally? And why would someone who supposedly couldn't afford an attorney insist on gathering evidence that only an experienced lawyer would know to request? Mr. Collins stepped away from the podium with the satisfied expression of a man convinced he'd framed the case exactly as intended. Your Honor, he concluded, my client has acted in good faith throughout these proceedings. Mrs. Bennet's repeated requests for additional documentation have done nothing but delay a resolution. The judge turned toward me. Mrs. Bennet. I rose, carrying only the same leather folder I'd walked in with. Your Honor, before addressing counsel's argument, I object to his characterization of the discovery process. Mr. Collins frowned. On what basis? The record reflects that my requests were timely, narrowly tailored, and authorized under the court's scheduling order. The judge looked down at the file. After a few seconds, he nodded. Sustained. A ripple moved through the gallery. Mr. Collins blinked once before continuing. He shifted to another point. My client's companies are separate legal entities and... Objection, I interrupted. He looked irritated. Again. The statement mischaracterizes the ownership disclosures already filed with this court. The judge reviewed another page. Sustained. The whispers grew louder. This is the second time. She knows exactly what she's doing. Ethan's confident posture began to change. He no longer leaned back. Instead, he watched me carefully, as though trying to remember a version of me he hadn't seen in years. Mr. Collins cleared his throat and adjusted his notes. Perhaps we should move to the financial exhibits. You may, the judge replied. As he searched through his binder, I noticed something new. His hands no longer moved with effortless confidence. He was checking tabs twice, rereading documents, looking for points that should have been routine. The judge finally looked over his glasses. Counsel, he said evenly, Mrs. Bennet argued appellate matters before this court on numerous occasions. The courtroom fell silent. I remember her preparation very well. Several heads turned toward me. One of the clerks quietly whispered something to another. Recognition spread slowly across the room. Mr. Collins stared at me. You practiced before this court. I did. For how long? Long enough to know that accuracy matters. Ethan's face lost what little color remained. No, he muttered under his breath. Why didn't anyone tell me? I opened my folder. With the court's permission, I said, I'd like to question Mr. Bennet regarding Exhibit 12. You may proceed, the judge answered. I walked toward the witness stand. Ethan, I began, my voice steady, do you recognize the Articles of Organization for Harper Ridge Holdings? His expression froze. I don't recall. You don't recall forming a company that bears your signature. Mr. Collins quickly stood. Objection. Overruled, the judge said. I placed the document on the witness stand. Then perhaps this will refresh your memory. The judge leaned forward, studying the exhibit. His expression changed immediately. He looked from the document to Ethan. Then he quietly called for a 15-minute recess. The courtroom emptied into the hallway, but no one went very far. Clusters of attorneys stood whispering outside the doors. Every few seconds, someone glanced in my direction. The story had changed. 15 minutes earlier, I had been the woman everyone assumed couldn't afford a lawyer. Now they were asking a different question. What did she find? Across the hall, Ethan grabbed Mr. Collins by the arm. What was that document? He hissed. I don't know yet. You said there wasn't anything she could use. I said there wasn't anything asterisk you told me about. For the first time since I'd known him, Ethan looked genuinely rattled. His girlfriend stepped closer. What's going on? Neither man answered. Mr. Collins took the exhibit from his briefcase again, reading every page much more carefully than before. His expression hardened. He looked back at Ethan. Is Harper Ridge Holdings the only company? Ethan hesitated. It isn't exactly. The only company. No. Mr. Collins closed his eyes for a moment. You told me every marital asset had been disclosed. I disclosed what mattered. That wasn't the question. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. Everyone back inside. The hearing resumed. I stood as the judge nodded toward me. Mrs. Bennet, you may continue. Thank you, Your Honor. I approached the witness stand again. Ethan, Harper Ridge Holdings was incorporated 8 months before you filed for divorce. Correct. Oh, yes. And you're the managing member. Yes. I picked up another document. This is the company's bank statement. Mr. Collins looked up sharply. He clearly hadn't seen it before. I continued. Would you agree that this account received multiple transfers from Bennett Development during the 6 months immediately preceding the divorce filing? Ethan swallowed. I'd have to review it. You've had these records for months. Silence. I handed another exhibit to the clerk. And these transfers total approximately $3 million. A murmur swept through the gallery. The judge raised his hand for silence. I continued speaking in the same measured tone. Those funds do not appear anywhere on the financial disclosure you signed under penalty of perjury. Mr. Collins slowly lowered his pen. He wasn't taking notes anymore. He was staring at his client. Ethan, he said quietly, did you tell me about these transfers? Ethan avoided his eyes. They weren't hidden. That wasn't my question. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said all morning. Every request I'd made during discovery suddenly fit together. Every financial record. Every corporate filing. Every delayed response. I hadn't been searching for leverage. I'd been following a paper trail. The judge removed his glasses and carefully reviewed the final exhibit before him. When he finished, he looked directly at Ethan. Before the judge could speak, Mr. Collins slowly rose from counsel table. Your Honor. He paused, choosing his words with obvious care. I need a private moment with my client. Mr. Collins and Ethan stepped into the consultation room adjoining the courtroom. The heavy wooden door closed behind them. No one in the gallery spoke. Even the judge remained seated, quietly reviewing the stack of exhibits in front of him. Nearly 10 minutes later, the door opened again. Mr. Collins walked back into the courtroom first. He looked very different from the attorney who had confidently promised an easy victory that morning. His shoulders were tense. His expression was restrained. Ethan followed several steps behind. The confidence that had carried him into court was gone. The judge looked toward counsel. Are we prepared to continue? Yes, Your Honor, Mr. Collins answered. His voice lacked its earlier certainty. The judge folded his hands. Based on the documentary evidence presented today, this court has serious concerns regarding the completeness of Mr. Bennett's financial disclosures. He lifted several exhibits. These records establish a consistent pattern of transfers into entities that were omitted from sworn disclosure statements. The courtroom was silent enough to hear papers turning. The judge continued. Whether those omissions were intentional will require further accounting. However, they cannot be ignored. He turned toward me. Mrs. Bennet, you chose to appear without separate counsel. Yes, Your Honor. May I ask why? I nodded. I spent years arguing appeals before this state's courts. I understood the law governing this case, and I knew the outcome would depend on evidence, not on which side hired the larger legal team. The judge gave a faint smile. That answer is precisely why I asked my earlier question. He looked directly at Mr. Collins. I was genuinely surprised that counsel did not recognize one of the finest appellate advocates to appear before this court. Another wave of whispers moved through the gallery. This time, no one was mocking me. People were looking at me with recognition. Several attorneys, sitting in the back, quietly nodded to one another. One older lawyer smiled, as if he had finally remembered exactly who I was. Across the room, Ethan lowered his head. His girlfriend stared at him in disbelief. "You told me she quit practicing," she whispered. "I thought she had. You didn't even know who you were divorcing." She stood without another word. Avoiding everyone's eyes, she quietly walked out of the courtroom. The sound of the closing door echoed through the room. Mr. Collins spoke next. "Your Honor, in light of the newly presented evidence, we will cooperate fully with any forensic accounting the court deems appropriate." The judge nodded. "So ordered." He continued issuing his rulings. A forensic accountant would review every disputed company. Previously undisclosed assets would be included in the marital estate unless proven otherwise. Additional hearings would determine any further remedies for incomplete financial disclosures. The financial advantage Ethan had spent months creating disappeared in a matter of minutes. When the hearing concluded, the judge looked toward me one final time. "Mrs. Bennett." "Yes, Your Honor." "Welcome back to the courtroom." "Thank you, Your Honor." It was a simple exchange. But after years away, it meant more than I expected. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Ethan, asking about the hidden companies and the court's findings. He offered no answers. For the first time since our divorce began, he couldn't control the story. Over the following months, the forensic accounting confirmed exactly what the documents had suggested. The omitted assets were returned to the marital estate. The court imposed financial sanctions for the incomplete disclosures, and Ethan's carefully cultivated reputation as a trustworthy businessman suffered lasting damage once the findings became public. As for me, I accepted something far more valuable than any settlement. I accepted invitations to return to appellate advocacy. Former colleagues reached out. Judges who remembered my work welcomed me back into a profession I had never truly stopped loving. I no longer introduced myself as someone's former wife. I introduced myself by the career I had built long before my marriage, and the one I was building again on my own terms. The courtroom never remembered the man who laughed when I walked in alone. It remembered the moment everyone realized I never needed anyone else to speak for me.